Welcome to the Coahoma Community College Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ouida McAfee, the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And today we have with us a special guest, Dr. Latish Reed. Welcome, Dr. Reed.
Thank you so much, Dr. McAfee, for having me.
Of course, and welcome back. You were actually with us last year, but this year you are a new author. So tell us some more about yourself.
Well, I have been a career educator. I was a school teacher in the Milwaukee Public Schools, and then I have served as an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as well as the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And my area of interest is educational leadership for K-12. But I've had the opportunity to work with people across different industries doing professional learning, where we are really taking a look at how to support all populations as we serve them, be that in education, healthcare, or corporate.
All right, what's the name of your new book?
My new book is The Complexities of Equity: Navigating Shades of Gray in Schools and Organizations. And I know equity is a bad word these days, but I really think that the book is going to be helpful because even if you take away the term DEI or you say we're not talking about equity, it still leaves all of the diversity that our schools, our communities, our different industries, and society still has. So, as leaders, we still need to know how to move forward at this point.
Okay, so that brings us to our topic today. I just can't give up now. Taking care of ourselves. I just can't give up now. Taking care of ourselves. Tell us some more about that.
Yeah, so this week, Monday, was Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, his holiday that we observe. And what we know about Dr. King is that there's this concept of weathering. And Dr. King was assassinated when he was 39 years old. When they did the autopsy on his body, it revealed that his heart was probably around 60 years old. And that is basically due to the lifelong chronic stress
Sure.
that he endured throughout his lifetime. And so there's a professor by the name of Dr. William Smith who did some research around racial battle fatigue. And he really looked at African American men and students on campus and how they had experienced like physical.
Okay.
So what we know is that his study looked at African American men and students and how they're experiencing racial battle fatigue, literally physical responses and symptoms as a result of the challenges that they feel navigating school and work and so on and so forth. And so as we advocate for others, we need to always be mindful of ourselves and making sure that we are taking care of ourselves. In my book, in chapter 7, I do talk a lot about that. And so I don't know if you maybe have some more questions that you want to ask me specifically about that.
Okay, I do. So in chapter 7, as you mentioned checking in. Tell us
Mhm.
about checking in. What do you mean by that?
So, one of the things that I did as a practitioner, because I actually was an equity administrator for the Milwaukee Public Schools, and it was a very stressful job because, again, there are so many things that we're doing that we just aren't mindful of students or those that may not be getting the services that they need. And so, this one position was created with one intern, and we were responsible for really educating the whole district and just working with the leaders and teachers and everybody on ways that we could better serve students.
Mhm.
What happened is I really was burning myself out, physically, mentally, and all the rest. And so ultimately, I had to actually leave the position because it was taking a physical toll on my body,
Mhm.
and my mind and my spirit.
Mhm.
I am a mother and I need to be present for my now young adult son, but back then he was young and I was sick and I wasn't doing well. And so, what are those things that we need to do to make sure that we are checking in with ourselves to make sure that we're okay? It doesn't have to be a 100% sprint all the time. When you are not well, you need to fall back. I can tell you, I even work with principals and leaders, and a couple weeks ago, I went to a school to do some professional learning with her leadership team. The principal was sick as a dog. She
Mhm.
had laryngitis. She couldn't even speak. She literally got out of her bed to come to make sure that everything was okay. And I just told her, I said, listen, you need to understand that you have to take care of yourself
Yes.
because if something happens to you, guess what's going to happen? They're going to have another principal in here within a day to do what you're doing. And
Mhm.
so I know you're very passionate about your work, but you're sick. You really shouldn't even be here. And so again, I know that we live in a culture where it's like a martyrdom culture where, the harder you work, the more you're rewarded. That is true, but the less time you will have to do the work. Although we know that our dear Dr. King was taken away by an assassin's bullet, but who knows how much farther he would have been able to go, given the condition of his body due to that chronic stress. So, again, we need to think about ways to make sure that we are well as we advocate for ourselves and advocate for others.
Excellent points. You talk about spheres of influence. So when, for example, in the case of the principal, when you are in a leadership position and others see you going through this, talk to me about or talk to us about the spheres of influence. What happens in that case?
So in the book, I talk about how we can make progress using our spheres of influence. So
Okay.
you have a sphere of control. That's what you do. This is you inviting me to this podcast to speak to your community. We have relationship. You know that this will be a benefit to your community. And so you invited me on.
Mhm.
That's what you control. Then there is your sphere of influence. You may not necessarily have a campus-wide reach, but you might say to, your supervisor or another department, I know someone that could talk about these issues.
Mhm.
Here's her information, and give that information to them to make the decision. But you've used your influence,
Yes.
and then there are things that are outside of our control.
Mhm.
And we need to figure out how to mitigate some of that. So even in the era where diversity, equity, and inclusion is being stifled, being erased, if you will, how do we mitigate that in light of the fact that we are still charged to care for people who are our students, who are our employees, and who live in our communities?
Mhm.
And so those are the three spheres of influence that we need to always be mindful of.
Okay. And so I know that you work in professional learning, professional development. So what are some of the tips that you can give to help us to be cognizant of these spheres of influence?
Well, I think it's about taking an inventory.
Mhm.
Right. What are the goals that we want to accomplish? A lot of times we operate and we are just in survival mode. A lot of
Mhm.
times
Mhm.
we want to make sure that our reports are in, and if we're a faculty member, our classes, our syllabus is together, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
But we know, everybody knows that there are pockets of students that may not be achieving. There are, faculty members that we might need to provide additional resources to for them to be successful in their roles. And so taking an inventory of those spaces, that's also part of the check-in. And then thinking about, now, what is it that's within my sphere of control?
Yeah.
How can I do something different here to make sure that said student or said faculty member or program that the buck stops with me? What are the things that I can do to change that?
Mhm.
Sometimes there may not be, but what email can you write? Or, if you know that you need some particular funding, can I influence a team to write a grant to meet the need that I find a gap in for what it is that I'm charged to do?
Uh-huh.
This idea of mitigating the things outside of us. First of all, we need to understand what are those things outside of us. And I think right now, in this first week after our president has taken his seat as president, there's a lot of misinformation about what different things are happening. So we look at social media, oh my God, this is happening, that's happening. We're hearing from other people. So, what can we do to research and understand exactly what's happening, and what are the things that we're able to do? And what will be the challenges to this work? So, or these mandates or edicts or whatever you want to call them, because I just charged to you, when we think about the civil rights movement, of course, people didn't want us to have civil rights.
Mhm.
But that didn't mean that people weren't going to still continue to pursue our God-given civil rights.
Mhm.
So we just need to think about those things. So what you control, who can you influence, and then understanding what's outside of your control.
Okay, so again, good points. You mentioned what's going on and all the movement that we're having since the election, presidential election. Something else that comes up in tandem or even before the election and it's happening now is that people are grappling with the AI. So, and just different technology because it's just leaps and bounds. Every day something is changing in technology. So, how does technology impact equity?
Well, I think again, it's about understanding the technology. Before we started the podcast, we were talking about ways in which I've been able to use some of the technology to support me as I'm beginning to market my book and create different things. I know that people are very scared of the technology,
Mhm.
but I think understanding, learning it, figuring out what part of it can you embrace, and then moving on from there, being taking an inventory of how other people around you are using it. um, I had a joke with some people a couple of days ago. Actually, we were talking about what did we do before email, and I literally remember my principal, who I adore, he's one of my career mentors, sent me to the workshop on how to use email. And when I brought it back, I was like, Mr. A, this is what we're going to be doing, and so on and so forth. He was like, we are not going to be sending emails around here. And it's so funny because before I left the school district, he was my boss again in the central office. And I said, now remember when you said we weren't going to do all these emails? Stop sending me emails. But at the end of the day, we have to remember the timing is now. the timing is for us to understand and embrace those parts of technology that we can. Because if we don't, then it will be another area that we are marginalized. So making sure that we do understand and begin to embrace some of the changes that are happening in technology.
Okay. Our topic is I just can't give up now. And what comes to mind for me is a safe space. When we think about taking care of ourselves and we talk about the sphere of influence, what can we do with our sphere of influence to create a safe space for ourselves and for our students?
So one of the things that I would say is, in this era, people are upset and they're nervous, they're scared, and all of those things.
Yes.
For me personally, and I can't speak for everyone, but I know that my faith
Mhm.
has become extremely important to me
Mhm.
during this time. Because again, I don't believe that any one person or any particular time can supersede the God that I believe in. So that is part of how I create a safe space for myself. And so I'm really relying on the promises that I know to be true.
Mhm.
Um, Also, again, I would say making sure that you are limiting your intake
Mhm.
of a lot of negative press, right? Even, whatever your political affiliation is, however you voted, um, read things that are more factual than opinion
Mhm.
based, because that will help you think straight.
Mhm.
One of the things during the election, and I can share with you, I did vote for Kamala Harris,
Mhm.
and I, for some reason, I really thought that she was going to win, and that was because I was in kind of a silo, an echo chamber of sorts. So on my social media, because I like certain things, and I was getting certain messages, whereas other people had different
Yes.
echo chambers and silos that said something different.
Mhm.
And so that made me realize, okay, during this time, I really need to be opening my ears and listening to what the facts are versus just what I want to hear. And
Mhm.
so I think that's going to be very important moving forward, whether you believe in DEI or you disagree with it, there still has to be, and there are those shades of gray. How do we come together to at least understand what's happening? And I believe you asked on behalf of our students,
Yes.
we owe it to them so
Mhm.
that we can be sharing information with them that is factual and not just our opinion, not just someone else's opinion, so that they too can formulate their own opinions about the way the world is and how we need to move forward because they are our future.
Yes. Absolutely. So I heard what you said about the technology and how you were in a silo because of the technology, because of the algorithm. You saw only certain pieces of information. And so I can see how that can be the case on campuses as well, because we hear that term often on campuses. Oh, well, we don't want to operate in silos. So that's a very good example of how on social media you can also be in a silo. So thank you for sharing that. And that's not what we want to do. We don't want to be in silos. So you started out our conversation talking about burnout with Dr. Martin Luther King. So what are some ways that we can alleviate some of this burnout once we get there? Because right now there's a lot of it going on, and we can see it in mental health, playing out in mental health too. So what are some ways that we can shield ourselves from it, from burnout, and alleviate the current burnout that we have?
Yeah, so I would say we need to adopt the notion that self-care is not indulgent.
Mhm.
It is an act of preservation to continue doing the impactful work that you do.
Mhm.
It's not optional for you to rest.
Mhm.
I do know that my grandmother, who has been gone for many years, as a little girl, I used to look up to her because Granny worked so hard. Like when we would go to Chicago, I live in Milwaukee, but we would go to Chicago and Granny would be making these huge breakfasts and I would get up early. She would get me up to watch her do this and to help her and
Mhm.
all of this, and I thought, oh, my granny, she just worked so hard. But my granny worked herself to her grave,
Mhm.
right? And so we need to think about that. Many of us have been trained to work that way in our careers, on our jobs. Like I said at the beginning, we view people that come in super early and leave super late. Those are the martyrs. Those are the ones that get the promotion, so on and so forth. But those are also the ones that have the heart attacks,
Mhm.
right? And so, how can we make sure that we are doing the things? Because work is going to be there.
Mhm.
Do your work, do it well, and make sure that you have a work-life balance. And
Mhm.
so, as you know, I have a son. I was always very, very cognizant of that as he was growing up. And when I was doing work in the Milwaukee Public Schools, we had Black Lives Matter week of action. And I
Mhm.
remember they wanted me to stay all these nights and I said to them, I said, I have a 9-year-old son and his Black life matters. So we need to figure out how I can get home because I need to be there for my own family. And
Mhm.
so, how are you showing up for your own family in
Mhm.
this work? Because trust and believe, if something happens to you, your family is going to be the one that's impacted. So
Mhm.
making sure that we are caring for our families. Also, our physical woman or man,
Mhm.
that's important. I have was diagnosed, but I am declaring and decreeing my healing
Yes.
with lupus.
Mhm.
And I know that it's important for me to take care of myself, and I do that. Every week, I am exercising a few times a week. I've taken on water aerobics because it's very good for joints and those things. But you need to figure out what is that physical activity that you can engage in that will sustain you. Even if you're at work, okay, can I get a 20-minute walk in at lunch instead of, spending the whole hour eating and conversating or whatever? But what are those things that you can do to make sure that you are caring for your body, your physical, and your family? Because at the end of the day, those are two things that you will need in order to be impactful in the work that you do.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Reed. You sound very courageous, inspirational, and courageous to me, because, there are the stigmas and stereotypes of taking care of yourself. Oh, you're just being lazy. We're in the Mississippi Delta. Oh, you come from there, so you can't do this. And so that makes you think, okay, well, I need to work harder. And so, like you said, working harder sometimes is to the detriment. So how do you recommend that others who may not have your courage at the moment to take the time that they actually do have at work that they refuse to take to take off to take care of themselves?
Well, I'm speaking to a community.
Yes.
But
Hmm.
what I would say is for me, that became very important. Um, when I realized that the institution itself that I was working in really didn't,
Hmm.
wasn't mindful when we had COVID. And you remember, and again, so I'm up north, and so I'm not exactly sure how everything was handled down in the Mississippi. Um, but what I know is that there was a lot of angst around. what was going on. So the masks and all of that. And I was concerned about my health during that time because I was like, well, I don't know. If they're saying people that have compromised immune systems could really suffer, severe consequences for that.
Yes. Hmm.
And I know that at one point, one of my superiors was like, I don't care. You need to plan this big thing. And I was like taken aback and thought, okay, this is how I understand that maybe they aren't really concerned with my well-being, and I need to make sure that I'm concerned with that. And
Yes.
so I would say, advocating for yourself as best as you can,
Hmm.
and just raising the concerns. And again, I know that sometimes when you raise a concern, that does put, a target or a spotlight on you. But again, that's a choice and a decision that you have to make,
Yes.
that in some cases could be life or death for you. So
Yes.
at some point, you could, not say anything. One of my favorite sayings is you always have freedom of choice, but you don't always have the freedom of the consequence. And so you need to think about what all the consequences are for you advocating for yourself and pick whatever one you will be comfortable with.
Mhm. And that's worked out for you, Dr. Reed. So
So far, so good.
yes, yes, I can attest to that. So, Dr. Reed, we're talking with Dr. Latish Reed. I just can't give up now is our topic. Dr. Reed, what would you like to leave with us? What is it that you want us to know?
I just would want everyone to know that you have purpose. And sometimes your purpose isn't always clear, but I wouldn't give up on seeking my purpose. When you know the direction you're supposed to be going in, go in it, take care of yourself, take care of your family, stay at peace, and stay out of those echo chambers.
I got it. We got it. Thank you so much, Dr. Latish Reed.
Thank you.